Hello, everyone on the internet. Welcome. We are thrilled that you are joining us, be it lunchtime, be it dinner time, wherever you are tuning in. It is my great pleasure to start the chain of introductions here and hand over the Zoom camera to Tristan. Enjoy the program.
Hello, everyone. Welcome on behalf of Humanities Tennessee to the Southern Festival of Books. If you're watching on Facebook Live or YouTube and you want to ask us some questions, you can feel free to type them in the chat. We may get to them. Just a reminder today that Parnassus is the bookseller, and so please support by purchasing the book. A Ghost in the Throat, and this by Doireann Ní Ghríofa. We're going to, I think, bring her on here in a second. So just to give you some more info, this is a free festival. It's supported by donations. We're going to give you that link if you want to support. But if you buy the books, you're helping to keep this festival free and spread the word about amazing books like the one we're going to discuss today. Doireann Ní Ghríofa is here to talk about A Ghost in the Throat, which I just finished reading, and I'm so excited to talk to her because this is a book that's described as a record of literary obsession, a narrative about the erasure of people, of a language, of women, a meditation on motherhood and on translation, and an incredible story about finding your voice by freeing another's. And I just really loved this book and I related to a lot of pieces from the book, and I just can't wait to bring Doireann here if we can
Hello.
have her. There she is.
Hi. Hello,
Hello.
everybody. Hi, Tristan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm still so struck as you're saying that. I can't believe that you've read this book. I mean, it seems it seems such a long distance, I guess, for a book to travel all the way here from here in Ireland where it was written all the way to you. And I have my wonderful publisher Biblioasis in America to thank for that. I mean, I'm pinching myself every day, Tristan, when readers are telling me that they're reading the book. I just can't believe it. It's really exciting.
You know, it's a really interesting thing to be read this book and then talk to the author. So I'm super excited, and I gotta tell you, I opened the book and from the first page, I was completely sucked in, not only by your obvious gift for writing and words, and I have this habit of photographing passages, so I can remember like the old underlining, but now it's this new version. I'm just snapping a photo, and I was just snapping, and I think, one of the first things that I would love to talk to you about, which I felt incredibly seen in I guess I should ask you first, is this truly you in this book and your experiences in motherhood, or are we, is it fair to say that I can relate to you through all the discussion of motherhood and breastfeeding and giving and exhaustion and
Yeah.
that really peculiar relationship, which is often depicted as like this like serene, peaceful, but it really is not.
Yes, and I think that that's something that a question that a lot of readers find themselves wondering about. So I'm glad that you raised that so early in our chat. Um, yeah, I guess like I think of the narrator of this book as a character that's extremely close to me, right? That in many senses is identical to a lot of the experiences that I lived through as well. Um and that's very, very close to my own lived experience. But there are moments within the narrative. So I should say for anyone watching that there are two threads that go through this book. There's a thread in contemporary Ireland of a young mother who becomes really interested in a very, very old poem. And the more she becomes interested in the old poem, the more she becomes interested in the woman who composed it centuries beforehand. So the woman in contemporary Ireland is essentially me, but there are moments where I felt like this book was demanding certain flights of fancy and certain explorations that required me to use my imagination a lot more and to veer a little towards the fictional, maybe. So some people have described it as autofiction, but I'm not sure that that's really precise either. But there are elements of both, and that's something that I like to be very upfront about. That it's in between genres in kind of a strange way, but that I think readers get and really respond to. So yeah, pretty much anything, any element of the ways in which motherhood particularly is communicated would be, you know, very, very close to my experience. Yeah.
I really loved sort of just the way that it would take an obsession. Okay, so let's talk about obsession, because as a musician, like a songwriter, it's really, you do get confronted. I'm thinking about, there's a passage in the book where you know, somebody comes over and sort of questions if the character in the book is in a night class, or why she's reading a certain book, and then the character sort of she sort of feels like questioning herself of why, you know, why do I have this obsession? And we talk a lot about desire, like what makes you finish the song, or I'm not sure how long did you work on this book?
For many years. The baby who is born within the book, my youngest child, my daughter, is now 6 years old. So that'll give you some idea of the time slip that's occurred here. But it was interesting when you were asking your first question and you were talking about highlighting different elements of the book and photographing different passages, like the way that you underline things. That didn't surprise me at all, Tristan, because of your deep connection with music and my deep connection with poetry. I feel like that's something we really have in common, that sense of lyricism and lyrics and the strange echoes that go back and forth between lines, the things that aren't said, the rhythm of a line and the pacing of a line. And even though this book is, like, it's written as prose, it's presented as prose, it's blocks of paragraph and text, so much of it, I'm sure your ear could pick up on, you know, really is poetry. It really is obeying that lyric impulse. And as I was writing this book, I spoke it out loud to myself over and over and over again. So the cadence of it, the little song that's in every paragraph, is so familiar to my ears still. So I was really thrilled that it spoke to you, you know, at that level, but particularly as a musician, because I would just, like, you know, there's a halo over your head as far as I'm concerned. I look up to musicians so much. It's just an extraordinary art, you know.
I think that's so true for myself as well. Like, I'm fascinated. We're so, like, in our own work that when I read your book and I think about you writing this book over, you know, 4 years, or dedicating yourself to something, and it's, you know, I don't know how long it took me to read 6 hours of my time, but the demand, right? So the demand to experience it, it's long form, and the demand for you is like equally long, right? I have a minute song. The demand to write it is not, I don't take 6 years or 5 years to write it. But I just think about, you must be scalpel with every passage, and you read it and you're like, oh, this isn't right. I mean, there are every page left me with an amazing combinations of words, the cartography of fog. So the character.
You can say me. That's
I
fine.
Feel like it's, I in my mind I imagine you, and it's sort of like this, almost like modern drama, or like the obsession of a detective trying, like the work that you do to discover, to basically give the author of this poem her story, which has been completely erased. So I think about, like, the work, you're scouring microfilms, scouring names, hours and hours. And that's not the fun part, you know. That's the work, right? The obsession that drives you to get through this work, to get the clues you need to reconstruct this woman's life, to kind of rebel against the erasure of this woman, right? You're kind of being an activist and like creating this narrative for her. It's almost the same as breastfeeding. In the sense that you're willing to put yourself through the work of motherhood, the grind, the repetition. And then I'm drawn to this other metaphor within the book, which is the migration patterns um, of animals. We think about that, but we don't think about our own migration patterns of, as you say in the book, you know, walking to the shed to get the tools, you know, to do gardening the way everyone's done for centuries, you know, things like, you know, how to homemaking in general, and how we learn that through our parents, and you know, for
Yes.
better or for worse.
Yeah. I feel like the way that you describe the obsession that essentially drives the book and drives the whole adventure of this story is something that you must relate to at some level. When you have that sense of a song, or when you have that sense of something repeating to you in a way that you feel an urge to communicate it using your voice. I mean, it's the way that I would use my voice in that sense, and the way that you would use your voice might be very different, and the way you would use your body to communicate that impulse. But I do feel like that impulse to sing from our lives, or to write from our lives, is so powerful. And it was really important to me, as I was writing A Ghost in the Throat, to honor that sense of effort as well, to bring the reader alongside me, not to kind of write a straight biography of this woman I was so fascinated with, Eileen Duffney Connell, who was an extraordinary woman. And although her poem had survived over the centuries to make it to us, the story of her life before and after the moment of composition of the poem had kind of been lost a little along the way. And that was what I was really curious about. And that was what drove me on this quest, I guess, to find out more. Like, I wanted to get to know her. I really wanted to get to know her. And the more that I pursued those kind of explorations through archival records that you described, the closer and closer I began to feel to her at a human level. And I think that's part of the reason why I've been so moved that readers like you have read this book and have responded to it, is because it isn't just a book that's singing from my own life and my own experience. It's also singing about the wonder of this other woman's life, how extraordinary her life was, and the fact that her art has survived to make its way to us. It just moves me so much. And I think the book itself is a work of passion in many ways. My fascination with her life, my passion for how important her life was, and an insistence on the fact that women's lives are important and do deserve that kind of sustained attention and research, and to become works of literature in themselves, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult pill to swallow. A lot of us are just so in denial about our temperance. And then you look at, you know, surviving 300 years as a woman, and sort of up against this desire, you know, to erase her from the obituary, or, you know, the desire to say, well, who else did this poem? Who could have done, who else could have been responsible for this, you know? And so it does take sort of an effort. You know, I love that it's repeated a female text. I love that you bring up references to traditions of art, like women's traditions, which we call crafts. We diminish, but it's art, you know, knitting, sewing, all of these actually very practical, useful labors of women that we
Yes.
diminish and we forget. But I mean, it is they are the remnants, you know, they are the living pieces of art, just like this poem that has lived. And this book made me think about oral traditions. I mean, mostly song in my culture, my family culture, but nursery rhymes, watching a child respond to nursery rhymes at a very, very young age, and thinking about how these poems have lasted centuries and they're still relevant. And yeah, I'm fascinated by and envious in some ways of you living in a culture where it's just such a very old culture and there's so many traditions, and it feels a little bit like in American culture. I don't know if it was the trauma of my immigrant ancestors or the burden of assimilation here that makes I think that for myself, you feel sort of cut off. There's always a sense of being cut off from your culture, or you're in some sort of, I mean, there are elements of American culture, of course, that I'm seeped in, but not such a long history, and a lot of I feel very cut off from that. Anyway, I'm digressing.
No,
I
that's
did want
really,
to.
I think that's actually fascinating, Tristan. And I'm so glad you raised that. It's something that I often hear from people who'd consider themselves the Irish diaspora in America as well. That sense of um really powerful identification with the culture that they would have originally belonged to before emigration, and really strong attachment as well to American culture, but almost like a very difficult sense to articulate, but a sense of loss to the depth of time that's kind of involved in people who remained, say, in Ireland or elsewhere around the world, that there's that sense of depth of connection by simply persisting in the place. And I think that they're such complicated feelings, particularly around trauma, you know, and it's really important, I think, to honor that.
There's a distinct. I've talked to a lot of third generation Italian Americans, and there was a very distinct effort to Americanize children. So no language was spoken in the house, complete cutoff from the culture, in an effort to assimilate, in an effort to survive in a very difficult, culture of white supremacy, where you were sort of trying to, uh, identify as much with the power structure as you could. And so you find that a lot of, in Italian American culture, a lot of that was just completely severed at its roots. So it's that you
And
see a
it's
lot of.
complicated by whiteness, I think, for us as Irish people as well, you know, that sense of trying to fit in at all costs and becoming complicit and active very quickly
Absolutely.
in that regime. You know, it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's a very real thing that happened, and just sort of sorting it out, generations later.
Yes.
Um, I think one of the wonderful things that I related to in the book as well is like, in and part of what feeds, I think, well, there's two things. We were talking about obsession, and I think that something you said really struck a chord with me, and it's this obsession with making yourself useful, feel useful.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a way that I create meaning, and whether it's creative or not doesn't really matter. Trying to we're trying to be a part of the altruism that sort of feeds our community and feels useful, and that's part of the joy of motherhood. But yeah, I loved that you said it that way. It made me feel like I had words for my own projections for why I'm motivated to put my child to bed at 8:30 at night and then work from 8:30 to 10:30, supporting, a a Black female political candidate in my state that won't win, you know.
Yeah. And sometimes these efforts and this work that we do, this labor that we perform that feels most important to us can almost feel simultaneously invisible as well, right? The things that you're putting most effort into, there isn't something tangible. It's not like, you know, if you're doing pottery or something, you go and spend all these hours, you have a pot to show, you know. So often we don't have a pot to show at the end of our efforts, but that doesn't mean that they're any less important. And I think that was important for me to try and articulate that, the sense, and I feel it as a shared emotion with other women, you know, that sense of almost feeling a little lost sometimes because of not having that tangible result to show, and yet knowing that you're doing your best to be useful, to give as much as you can.
Yes, there's no like big item on the list to cross off. You know, there's
Yes.
no sense of accomplishment, just a sense of giving endlessly. And I think that the more you can meditate in the work and the desire in giving, and the less you can focus on the results, that actually the more happy you become, because meaning is, you know, and I think that you gave me words for that, which is like really, really amazing.
Thank
I
you,
feel,
Jason.
yeah, I feel like you were doing what only a writer can do, and in the same as a musician or a comedian, you become so influenced by something, and you want to know everything about it, and you become obsessed, and in a sense, um, you're like doing the work to archive for your inspirations. And I
Yes.
feel like archiving is a huge element of work that's not very fun. It can be fun, but it's not always fun. It's like, you know, it is the actual, you know, scrubbing of the floor. It's the work, you know, the thing. And I felt like this was sort of kind of a courtly love of yours. Like you were, you know what I mean? You were
I
like,
do. I do.
you're like so happy to be in love with this poem that you decided, you know, I'm gonna give, you know, give back, right,
Yeah.
to this woman,
Yeah.
and give to all other women in the process. So it's just such a beautiful thing.
But isn't it funny how sometimes when we try through various art forms to articulate the thing that feels most amazing and astonishing in our own lives, and yet we kind of feel like everyone's going to think I'm crazy for being so into this. And yet they're the things that people respond most positively to, when you can let go and really speak from the heart and what drives you. And, you know, I'm really obsessed with this poet who lived and died hundreds of years ago, and here's why. That can be, that kind of cry from the heart can be something that people will respond to really strongly. That just shocks me.
You know, I think that part of, I think that for other, I mean, don't you feel like it's always getting to a place of simplicity and honesty, and almost there's like an obviousness to it that you can't see, because we're always busy, you know, trying to, for me, I'm always trying to like, what's new, what's fresh, you know, you know, how can I push things, you know, and sometimes you have like an emotional, simple thought that just comes, and that's, you know, the most important one. You're just waiting to
Isn't
catch
that
that.
amazing though? And isn't it amazing how it's always the way?
It's always the way.
It's
And
always the way.
I think that, you know, you can chase it all you want. But it comes to you, you know, probably when you're giving, like, you know, I have a lot of admiration for the selflessness of this pursuit in this book, and also, like, I found myself really into like the end when you start to like follow the lineage of the family.
Yes.
You know, because I love a good detective drama, you know. It really kind of came in at the end for me, like feeling that way. So it was nice to be on that journey, and it was nice to really think about the context of um, the life of these people writing something, and the poem itself, you know, and then learning about her history, and you know, it being her second marriage and being disowned from her family in the sense,
Yes.
um, and then, you know, her sort of devotion and passion for this person. And then, like, the poem that she wrote felt very much like it was her way of telling the story and vindicating sort of what happened. And I do feel that sense in writing music, like I'm trying to, in many times, vindicate myself or a character or women, or, you know, this is the problem and this is what's happening and what's the story there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway.
That's so interesting. I have to say that when one thing that surprised me as I was writing the book was that I became really drawn to kind of what I perceived originally as quite a peripheral figure within the poem, within the occurrences that swirled around the poem as it was spoken by Eileen Dove. And that was this beautiful horse that was owned by her husband, Arthur O'Leary. And that was the horse over which he was murdered in the end. And the Queen, the poem that came to us, was composed, as you know, Tristan, over his body. So in many ways, if he hadn't had the horse, he wouldn't possibly have been murdered, and she may never have spoken this poem that found its way to us. And the more I thought about the poem, the more I found myself thinking and thinking and thinking about this horse. And when I was thinking about this event this evening, I found myself thinking about the horse again when I was wondering about what I would speak to you about. And so I prepared a really short reading from that part about the horse, but I also picked out two poems that I think you would like that are also about horses, and they're both by American poets. They're not my own. So if that's okay, I'll read a little piece from A Ghost in the Throat about Arth, Eileen Dove's husband's horse, and then I will read you the two poems I picked for you, and I really hope you like them.
I love it. I love it.
Let me see now. I've got it here and ready to go. So I'll begin with this little piece about the horse. And it's kind of like, almost like a mini biography or an attempted biography of this imagined horse, who was very real, of course, historically as well. The horse who is galloping through our thoughts now is a female being, conceived, born, and reared in Europe. Look, the stable is dawn dark and straw hush, and through this gloom we watch her birth, swimming hoof first from the warm ocean of her mother's body. Little footling, her hooflets are waves, dashing wildly against the earth, amazed. She is of solid stock, as bright and as quick as any of her foremothers. Through each generation of her family, a human voice has echoed the same words in a series of tongues. Good girl, good girl. Once weaned, she is schooled in servitude. Her life's purpose, she sees, will be to bear a human weight. And she learns it quick, the ways of stirrup and bit, of rein and whip, the crisp straw of cavalry stables, the swish and clang of swords, the tang of muskets. No matter How many times Eileen Dove's poem galloped from mouth to mouth. No matter how many academic works respond to it, one detail is always missing. We never learn this horse's name. I can't bring myself to invent one. Instead, I honor her among the unnamed, a further absence among all the other female absences that are missing from this tale. I want you to know that she was a female being. I want you to know that she was a female being. I want you to know that she was. That's that. And the first poem that I'd like to read for you is from a relatively new book published by Saraband, and the name of the poet is Emma Hine. The book is called Stay Safe. I can never figure this out. There's the book. It's called Stay Safe. You'll get it in any good bookshop. I'm sure Parnassus will have it for you. And the poem that I'm going to read is called Young Relics. They broke into houses, my sisters, the empty ones just built where nobody had yet tried to sleep. Little mounds of sawdust still in the corners, no floorboards loose. I imagined them there the way I've seen them be with horses, hands gentle on the walls. After all, a house must learn to hold a family with all its quivering systems of energy and grief. I once saw Sierra with a colt that wasn't ready to be ridden. She stood in the stall and talked until his heart rate slowed. All through our neighborhood, new houses were dark and panicking. Enter sisters, bringing comfort where it wasn't supposed to be. No key for entry, no light allowed, just a ritual gift for the rooms alone to remember. Hands on their painted flanks, voices in the eaves. That's from Stay Safe by Emma Hine, which is a really, really beautiful book. And I think it's her first book of poetry. It's really special and I really recommend it. I have one other poem if you have time, Tristan.
Oh, yes, I'm loving it. I'm listening.
Okay, great. This one is from one of my favorite American poets. It was called Lucy Brock Broido, and she passed away a number of years ago, sadly. But this book, I really recommend it. It's called Stay Illusion. And I'm really sorry, everyone, for how terrible my skills are at doing this kind of thing. You'll see her name there, Lucy. Look, I can't even put my finger the right way with it being all back. Lucy Brock Broido, and the book is called Stay Illusion. I was so happy to find this book purely by chance on a tiny island called Valentia Island off the west coast of Ireland in a secondhand bookshop. I can't imagine what circumstances brought this beautiful book, which I think was published by Knopf, in America, to this tiny island on the west coast of Ireland, but I was extremely glad to find it there. And the poem I'm going to read for you is quite a short one, but there are horses here, so listen out for the horses. What if it is true now? I do not want to speak of that which has been given me to say. See, each four-legged rests his face against the fence's slats and asks no questions, why or how long. How dare you come home from your factory of autumns, your slaughterhouse, weathered and incurious, with your hair bound loosely, not making use of every single part of the horse that was given you? What of his hooves, his mane, his heart, his gait, his cello tail, his joy in finding apples fallen as he built his coat for winter every year? That's Stay Illusion by Lucy Brock Broido. And that's highly recommended as well. And there's a picture of her on the back, and she's so beautiful. And I really recommend those poems. I'm sure that everyone who's watching would really enjoy them.
I'm definitely going to pick both of those books up at Parnassus, and I'm sure we can get some links to all that stuff, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think, Tristan, if you got your hands on either of those books, you would be highlighting and underlining and photographing all the poems there.
I'm definitely going to head across town to Parnassus and pick up a few things, and so I will definitely have those on my list.
Cool.
Thank you. All right. So okay, the horse is so she's a female horse. I wanted to talk about this because you always imagine, do you notice that we sort of always imagine strong images to be male? Is that part of this? Because when I think about it, I think when you said this horse is female, I thought, well, I never even imagined it was another female energy. I think it's just an interesting default that we have where we imagine something.
Yeah, and it's interesting how often we internalize those kind of ideas. And I think it's something I think about a lot as I'm raising my own children, the means whereby those kind of ideas are communicated, whether it's from us as parents, the stories we read our children, the songs we sing to them, the various media, cartoons, that kind of thing that they encounter. Where do such ideas come from that we automatically attribute gendered ideas like that? And it's something I think we need to be alert about, I guess, in our attempts at parenting.
Yeah, and also in limiting ourselves, the limits we place on ourselves, because we have only seen in the images that scroll past us, we see things presented in a certain way. And so then we craft an image for ourselves of what we're capable of based on that. And so I think that there's been a major effort in the last 10 years, 5 years to present just to make an effort to present more complex images of women in lead roles, which is also something that doesn't happen as often. And I see it all around me in film and in books and literature, and it makes me feel hopeful in a sense, but I'm glad that the conversations are happening,
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Me too. I noticed that we only have a few minutes left now. I don't know if you or your viewers have seen that it's slowly starting to get darker and darker here in Ireland. Well, things are still remaining quite bright there, and soon I will just be like completely covered in darkness.
You'll fade magically. I just recommend this book to everyone. I recommend this book to anybody who it makes things, any artists out there, any mothers out there, and anybody who's a fan of activism through and altruism through bringing light to stories that are untold. And I find it just so fascinating, interesting, and on top of that, it was just so incredibly easy and gripping. And like you said, I can tell there's such a musicality and so much inspiration in just the way you use language. And so I'm just honored to be here speaking with you today. And everybody buy this
Tristan,
book.
thank you. Oh,
Yes.
thank you so much. That's really, really kind. And as I said at the start, it feels almost miraculous that this book found its way to you. And I'm so glad that you had time to read it and that you enjoyed it. And thank you so much for taking part this evening. And thanks to everyone who organized the event this evening too. Patrick and Tim were very helpful at the start with getting everything sorted. And I'm sure there's so many people behind the scenes that are involved. And I just want to thank everyone from here in a wet, drizzly Irish evening. I want to say huge thanks to everybody for inviting me along, and especially to you, Tristan. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anytime.